Alright, we're here to talk about Vital Strength of the Earth, which is one of the core game spirits and one of the starting spirits. A good spirit to start out the game with to get a feel for how everything works. It is probably the most defensive of the starting options, and that makes a lot of sense because it's a spirit of solidity, of growth, of a healthy land that can be destructive but in a slow, ponderous way, or it can be extremely fruitful in the way that good soil grows good crops. In terms of difficulty, Vital Strength of the Earth is one of the easier spirits to learn and one of the harder spirits to master. And this is entirely because it has a very slow play style. And some people will take to this immediately. Vital Strength of the Earth starts, as you might expect, in the mountain. And it also starts in the jungle, and this is because it's a spirit not only of earth and stone and immovability, it's also a spirit of growth. It's a spirit that deals with abundance. So you're going to be starting in places that are strong in both of those areas. Jungles, teeming with life. Mountains, teeming with stone. I don't actually know if stone teems. Your growth is so very slow. You're not going to be covering the board. You're going to be focusing your power in a couple of key places. This ties into Earth's vitality, which is its special rule, which means that every place that it has a sacred site, it just has innate defense. It takes a lot more damage for the invaders to blight, and this makes the Dahan sort of your best friends when it comes to counterattacks. You can, early on, establish a few bastions of control where one or two invaders aren't going to do anything in a way that other spirits just can't. But in later game, you need to be able to amplify that with some other more defensive cards. So I've mentioned growth a couple of times of the spirit, and let me just explain why it's difficult to work with. The first real reason is that you can only pick one growth option, and this can be both a blessing and a curse. It means you have to make less decisions, but it also means each of those decisions carries more weight. If you want a new power, you can't place a presence at anything other than range 0. If you want energy, you can add a presence a little bit farther away, range 1, but that's still just range 1, and when you've got people all across the map who are begging for your help, that's a pretty momentous decision to where you're going to put that presence. And when you reclaim, you can add a presence at range 2, which means that when you're getting everything back, you can reach out the most. But remember how I said that most of its cards and most of its powers and its special rule deal specifically with sacred sites. So you have to plan ahead. Its innate power is one of the hardest to use because it takes a long time to build, and this is entirely because it uses 3 different elements that it's just going to take a while for you to get that number of cards with those correct elements, but it is incredibly powerful because it lets other spirits, and potentially you, repeat powers. And repeating is always a very, very powerful action because you can do the same thing. Allowing any other spirit to do that is a huge advantage. It starts off small. It has some energy restrictions on what you can and can't do, but you can, over time, amplify that to be something extremely nasty, especially with the aid of someone like lightning. I mean, that's already a destructive spirit on its own, but imagine allowing that person to repeat blowing up a town or blowing up a city or any of the other things that it can do. So, in terms of starting cards, my favorite is A Year of Perfect Stillness. And this is because it, to me at least, exemplifies everything that this spirit is about. It has a high cost, which sounds weird, but you get a lot of energy to start with, and it just makes every action the spirit takes feel momentous when you're paying 3 or 4 or 5 energy for a single thing. I know it's a silly thing, but when you start doing it, it'll feel like a major power right off the bat. And it has major power level power because you just pick a land, nothing happens in that land. Absolutely nothing. The invaders can't explore, they can't ravage, they can't build, and when used correctly, this can lock down an area and utterly change the game. You're probably going to be using it the entire game, to be honest. I know I do. Vital Strength has a very powerful endgame, and you can go any number of ways, but really it could be broken down into offense or defense. Offense is taking skills that create blight on the board. Volcanic Eruption being sort of the epitome of that. Because Vital Strength can remove blight as just an innate thing. It has a starting power card that lets you remove blight. Adding blight to the board isn't nearly as much of a threat. It still needs to be done cautiously, but it's something that you can work with. So doing 20 damage at the cost of adding a bunch of blight, maybe that's worth it. The other way to go that's very natural and very easy is a more defensive one, and this is something where any defensive card really can contribute to this, as can any card that gathers Dahan or gathers towns. And this is because, since you are just innately defensive in all of your sacred sites, anything that you can do to pull little chunks into those sacred sites, little things that you can do to draw invaders to places where they're going to get ambushed or killed by the Dahan when they counterattack, that's just a great card. My personal favorite defensive card with this spirit is Draw of the Fruitful Earth. It's a slow card, and on the face of it, it doesn't really seem all that powerful. It lets you draw up to 2 explorers at range 1 and gather up to 2 Dahan at range 1. But when you combine that with your ability to defend in all of your sacred sites, that's basically saying, get forces in position and then let the Dahan just annihilate them. 2 Dahan can take down a city if they're defended, and you defend things. It's just a very natural progression. Now, if you're using Jagged Earth, we introduce things called aspects, which are cards that can change the core basic spirits: lightning, river, earth, and shadows. My favorite, and this is more of a sideways complexity than an increase, is called Anchor the Land's Resilience. In lands with your sacred sites, it takes 8 additional damage to add blight to the land. So 10 damage to add blight. The trade-off is that instead of doing defense in those lands, they take more damage. And you're giving up your ability to let the Dahan counterattack for you, but you're not going to be getting blight nearly as frequently. So it's a really cool sideways jump into having a playstyle that's mostly the same, but that still requires a very radical alteration of your personal philosophy and how you play the spirit. So just to sum up, Vital Strength is one of the core starting spirits that is great if you want to have a defensive experience, or if you want to just focus on what's going on in your board and let everyone else kind of do their own thing. You can be independent, you can be supportive, but it's up to you. I think that it's a great one for people who like a slower game and who like to feel like they're doing big, momentous things every single time they do them, because that's how it's going to feel.